Hello, and welcome to the 2020 Mayoral Debate for Black Portland, hosted by PAALF Action Fund in collaboration with Black Voices United and produced by Open Signal Labs. My name is Shani Harris-Bagwell. My pronouns are she, they, and queen. I'm a Black woman with dark brown skin, brown eyes, with large brown tortoiseshell glasses, and short platinum blonde natural hairstyle. Today I'm wearing a light brown short-sleeved ankle-length shirt dress with pockets, sparkly silver and rose gold choker-style necklaces, and black boots. My fingernails are long, sparkly, and jeweled. As political director of PAALF Action Fund, I am proud to be your moderator for this evening. I want to hold space and extend a special welcome in no particular order to all Black people, African Americans, Africans, immigrants, documented and undocumented, Muslims, refugees, and all people of African descent in the diaspora. Welcome to trans, NB, and gender nonconforming folks, to femmes, queer folks, and people living with disabilities, both visible and invisible, to renters, low-income folks, folks sending money back home, to those who have been displaced or gentrified, those who are far from home, whether by choice or circumstance, to all survivors and victims of violence, to victims of state-sanctioned violence and torture and those previously incarcerated, to mothers, primary caregivers, and teachers, and to those who have lost someone to illness or disease. We see you, all of you. All parts of you are welcome and safe here. Before we get started, I would like to read a land acknowledgement and gentrification displacement acknowledgement. Thank you to Native American Youth and Family Center for providing us with this land acknowledgement. We would like to respectfully acknowledge that the land on which we're gathering today is the traditional homelands of a diverse array of indigenous tribes and bands. Multnomah County rests on traditional village sites of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Malala, and many other tribes who made their home along the Columbian River, which is now home to a vibrant Native community representing over 400 different tribal nations. We recognize Indigenous peoples as the traditional stewards of this land and acknowledge the enduring relationship between the land and the people since time immemorial. We would also like to acknowledge that Northeast Portland, where our physical offices stand, was once home to a thriving, connected Black community. There are still Black people there today because we are resilient people. The fundamental state of settler colonialism still exists. Oregon was founded as a white utopian state, and colonialism is still doing grave damage in the form of gentrification and displacement of Black people, forcing people to move far away from their homes, sometimes as far as out of state. We acknowledge the twinned dehumanizations of Indigenous land and Black bodies that were turned into property in the name of U.S. imperialism. It is also important to move beyond acknowledgement and reflect on our own history that brought us to this place. Let's each take a moment to reflect on our own journeys that brought us here today. Here at PAALF Action Fund, we are in the early stages of strengthening our framework of Indigenous solidarity. We're interested in moving beyond tokenism, beyond land acknowledgement, and beyond simply naming the problem toward true solidarity, which requires action. This solidarity will challenge us to think differently about land ownership. Thank you. We would like to thank our interpreters, Roman Tekle, translating in Amharic, Wajdi Saeed in Arabic, Ismail Warsami translating into Somali, and Haika Mushi will be translating into Swahili tonight. On your screens, you will be seeing Marceau Michel and Andrew Tolman alternating as our ASL translators. Thank you all. This is a mayoral debate that will unapologetically center Black issues. This event is for the entire Black community, but especially the members who feel disengaged from politics. At the debate, you will learn about the candidates and hold space for candidate accountability. All candidates running for mayor on and off the ballot were invited to participate. This debate offers a unique chance to hold the white mayoral candidates accountable to the specific needs and demands of Black Portlanders. This debate is not an endorsement of any candidate. That said, let's welcome the candidates. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to introduce themselves. We ask that you give your name, pronouns, and briefly describe yourselves, including your skin tone, hair, clothes, jewelry, and anything else of note for our visually impaired viewers, and that you speak slowly and don't interrupt one another for the sake of our interpreters. First up, we have current Mayor Ted Wheeler, followed by Sarah Iannarone. The order was decided by a digital coin toss. Mayor Wheeler, your time begins now.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Shani, for being our moderator today, and thank you to everybody who helped create this forum and this space. And I appreciate the fact that we are going to specifically discuss issues related to Black Portlanders. So my name is Ted Wheeler. I'm the mayor. I'm 6 feet tall. I am white. I have what I describe as blonde hair, what my 14-year-old daughter describes as rapidly graying hair. I have what I think are blue eyes, what she thinks are bloodshot eyes. In terms of what I'm wearing today, I'm wearing jeans, I'm wearing a gray blazer and an off-white shirt. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And again, I thank everybody for hosting us and giving us this forum here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Iannarone, your time begins now.
Thank you very much, and thanks to everyone who's hosting this tonight and for being a part of this if you're viewing at home. I know there are a lot of things that you could be doing with your time besides this, and engaging in civics is very important, so thank you. My name is Sarah Iannarone. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am wearing a black blazer, snappy black blazer, a cheerful yellow blouse. My hair is cropped short. I am wearing round black eyeglasses. I'm a Caucasian of European descent, and I'm about 5'8", but I'm seated, so you can't really tell that.
Thank you. Let's dive right into our first round of questions. You'll have 2 minutes to answer the question and 1 minute to respond to your opponent, and I will ask follow-up questions as needed. Ready? Here we go. In April, the City of Portland's Equity Toolkit for COVID-19 response efforts pointed out that Black communities were likely to see the most disparate outcomes from the COVID-19 illness and other impacts of this pandemic. This is because well before the health crisis began, Black Portlanders were far behind white Portlanders in access to quality education, health, and economic prosperity. COVID-19 has only widened this gap, leaving Black Oregonians as some of the most vulnerable to houselessness, unemployment, food insecurity, poverty, and loss of assets like businesses, homes, and cars. How will you work in collaboration with Bureau Directors of the Housing Bureau, Prosper Portland, the City Budget Office, the Bureau of Emergency Management, and City Councilors to protect and stabilize Black Portlanders during and after this pandemic? We will begin with Sarah Iannarone. Your time begins now.
This is so critical because we know that the COVID crisis has laid bare the inequities that were already prevailing here. And so one of the most important things that we can do moving forward is make sure that we are investing where we can stabilize vulnerable communities. We have seen the impacts of well-intentioned policymaking coming out of the City of Portland in terms of land use planning and zoning, economic development, and how that has had, in many cases, a negative impact on Black Portlanders. What it's going to be important for us to do in the future is not just apply an equity lens to our problems, but make sure that we're doing so through disaggregated data so that we're able to track our investments relative to outcomes, making sure that we're mobilizing all of our resources by leveraging our dollars and listening to our community partners, by stabilizing vulnerable communities and schools with high turnover, making sure that we're caring for the needs of people in East Portland in particular.
I want to pause, but can I just redirect for one moment?
Sure.
I think the question is, we really want to know, like, how will you work in collaboration with these bureaus, specifically to help Black Portlanders?
Okay, so more specifically, thank you for clarifying. More specifically, there are some things that we can do in the short term. I've committed to putting an officer for small business and entrepreneurship right in the mayor's office to oversee and coordinate all of the investments in small business and entrepreneurship through the recovery, both in access to capital, technical assistance, and even commercial real estate. I've talked about making sure that we're pushing aggressively on anti-displacement efforts out of the Planning Bureau, making sure that anti-displacement is at the top of our agenda when it comes to land use decision making. In particular, again, making sure that I'm focused on East Portland, where we know many people of color, not just Black Portlanders, but all Portlanders of color. A lot of immigrant and refugees have been displaced in recent years, so concentrating investments in East Portland, even focusing on things like working with our partners around the city, region, and state to focus on, can we get access to fareless transit? Can we work on making sure people are shored up through the eviction crisis that is looming?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Wheeler, I'm going to restate the question one more time and ask you again. How will you work in collaboration with bureau directors of the Housing Bureau, Prosper Portland, and the City Budget Office, and the Bureau of Emergency Management, and city councilors to protect and stabilize Black Portlanders during and after this pandemic? Your 2 minutes begins now.
Great, thank you for the question, and it's critically important right now in the midst of the pandemic. So the Housing Bureau, the Budget Office, Prosper Portland, those bureaus report directly to me. I'm the commissioner in charge of those bureaus. The Bureau of Emergency Management does not report directly to me, but I have direct interactions and regular interactions with them. I was very proud of the fact that specifically what the city of Portland did under my leadership as the mayor was we pushed hard for the state to act quickly to stop the spread of the pandemic, which we already knew at that point disproportionately impacted people of color. The second thing that we did before any other jurisdiction in the state was we brought together a coalition of community organizations and individuals to make sure that we got dollars out the door. And we got dollars out the door before any other jurisdiction directly to households that were impacted by the economic consequences of COVID. I worked specifically with the Housing Bureau.
I just want you to frame this specifically towards Black Portlanders.
Yeah, so let me do that. So I worked specifically with the Housing Bureau to ensure that we reallocated dollars towards household expenditure vouchers. So those were vouchers that could be used for any household expenditure that was seen as a critical household expenditure. We worked with Prosper Portland to stand up a committee and economic resilience task force. The very first dollars that went out the door went out to communities of color generally. And then specifically, we allocated resources towards a grant program, $12 million towards a grant program to support minority entrepreneurs and business owners, including obviously African American Black business owners. We just allocated 900 grants to those communities. In addition to that, we allocated $35 million towards rent support.
And I just have one follow-up question. Sure. We're talking about minority business owners. In Portland, actually, white women make up a substantial portion of what we consider to be minority business owners. Is there anything that you earmarked specifically to ensure that those dollars would go to Black-owned businesses?
Yes. First of all, we do. So the Inclusive Business Resource Network that we stood up through Prosper Portland back in 2017 was specific to all people of color who are business owners or operators, but I'm told about 40% of those dollars went specifically to business owners or operators that identify as Black or African American. The Mercatus and My People's Market, which we run through Prosper Portland, of which I'm the commissioner in charge, that focuses heavily, I couldn't give you the specifics on the data, but I know it is heavily weighted towards the Black community. In fact, the last My People's Market was at Self-Enhancement Inc., and it really focused on our Black entrepreneurs and business owners. And then, of course, through the COVID response itself, that's been focused heavily towards minority business owners.
Thank you.
And, oh, yeah.
Sorry, don't cut you off, but thank you, that's your time. Sarah Iannarone, would you like to respond? You can also yield your time.
I'll just say that it's important for us to think more strategically than we have been. I understand that there's a long-standing lack of trust between Black Portlanders and the Bureau, formerly known as the Portland Development Commission, now known as Prosper Portland. It's one reason I've committed to pulling some of those activities up into the mayor's office so that we can work on rebuilding trust across the community while also coordinating various capacity around the city so that it's not just Prosper Portland leading on those things, but we are leveraging our other partnerships from the public, private, and philanthropic sector to make gains. And by centralizing not only those investments, but also that data collection and monitoring, I believe that I'll be more directly responsible for how these monies are spent and then also held accountable on the other side when I'm seeking election in 4 years to make sure that you don't invite me back if I haven't made good on my promises to the community.
Thank you. Mayor Wheeler, would you like a minute to respond?
I won't respond to that because I actually agree with what Sarah just said. I think the difference is I've actually done what I said I would do when I was here 4 years ago. The Portland Means Progress initiative is specifically focused on elevating and creating on-ramps for young people of color, but with a focus on the Black community to give young people an option to work in higher skill, higher wage jobs in our community, to create a culture of equity and diversity amongst our employers, both small businesses as well as larger employers in the community. And then the focus we've had around Prosper Portland has put the community in leadership. For example, the North Russell, North Williams development, that's a development that has a huge historical significance to the historic ALBINA community, and we've put that community in charge of making those decisions.
That's your minute. Thank you, candidates. We're going to take a small break to hear about some opportunities from PAALF Action Fund. We'll be back in just a moment.
We have exciting news. PAALF is now Imagine Black. Imagine Black. Imagine a world where people of African descent enjoy the rights, resources, and recognition to be a thriving, resilient, and connected community. That's the work that we do, and we'll keep freedom dreaming, just under a different name. Imagine Black. We know that there are as many ways of being Black as there are Black people. We unapologetically center those most marginalized within Black communities. And our Black does not exclude or erase anyone of African descent or anyone from the African diaspora. Imagine Black. Become a part of the work that we do and join our crew at imagineblack.org. A new world is waiting. Help us build it. Our award-winning ALBINA Queens photo project is both art and activism. This ongoing series marks an occasion where Black femininity is seen, counted, valued, and loved. And that's a political act. This project shows that our work is for the love of all Black people. We celebrate those who claim, reclaim, and disrupt traditional constructs of Black femininity in its many forms. Trans women, non-binary femmes, intersex women, cis women, youth, elderly, people with a range of abilities, and everything and everyone in between. We know that it is in this wide spectrum where we find the beauty and power of Black people. People like you. Go to imagineblack.org/ALBINA Queens to see our latest project and to find out first about our next one.
If you're just tuning in, I'm Shani Harris-Bagwell, Political Director of Imagine Black, formerly PAALF, and I'm here with Mayor Ted Wheeler and mayoral candidate Sarah Iannarone at the mayoral debate for Black Portland. Let's just jump back into it. Portland Housing Bureau's State of Housing Report shows that there are no neighborhoods in Portland where the average Black household can afford to live. While the city has substantially increased its production of subsidized, regulated, capital A affordable housing, It can serve only a tiny fraction of the needs of Black Portlanders who rent and are cost-burdened, own in precarious situations, or who are currently houseless. Aside from income-restricted rental housing production, what do you identify as 2 to 3 most important actions you will take to ensure that Black Portlanders are safe, stable, and can afford housing in the city of Portland in the communities of their choice? We will begin with Mayor Wheeler.
Well, first of all, I'm very proud of the fact that the City Council came together to support an anti-displacement package in the most recent budget. That's focused on some of the communities that we think have the highest rates of displacement. The second area is continuing to be a good steward of the 2016 housing bond. You'll recall I got a little bit of criticism from some because I slowed down the deployment of the housing bond dollars. And the reason I slowed it down was I wanted to engage community groups, including organizations that represent the Black community, and have them help establish the framework for how those dollars would be deployed. And even though we slowed it down, the fact of the matter is we're now ahead of schedule and we have over-delivered on the promises from the original 2016 housing bond. And the third area is thinking about how do we increase both the diversity of options as well as the affordability options around housing. And I was very proud of the work that my city council did, the work we did with the Housing Bureau, the work we did with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability to get the residential infill program across the finish line. And again, we worked with a broad coalition of community partners to make sure that people can afford to live in this city, that we don't have a Disneylandification of Portland, that it becomes a city only affordable to the very wealthy. And those intentional kinds of decisions are going to help keep our city real by allowing people who do the hard work in the community, people in service jobs, hospitality jobs, people who are school teachers, firefighters, allow them to continue to live in the city in which they work. Those are the 3 things I'd pick.
Thank you. Sarah Iannarone, your time begins now.
I'll work from the short term, midterm, and long term because this is a problem we know is going to be very challenging through and on the other side of COVID, and I'm very worried about the looming eviction crisis once the moratoriums are lifted, not just for renters, but also mortgage holders who have had their mortgage payments deferred and will now owe huge amounts of money. Recently, my opponent's campaign was funded by over $150,000 from the Portland metro area realtors, which I think is pretty indicative of when hard decisions are going to be made, which side of the equation he'll be on. Alternatively, my small donor campaign has been funded by almost 1,000 people who self-identify as either unemployed or retired. And so our priorities in terms of rental assistance, making sure that Wall Street isn't getting a bailout, even as we're trying to make sure our renters are stabilized here, and even our small mom and pop landlords in the short term is going to be very important to me. In the midterm, we need to make sure that we're foregrounding anti-displacement in everything that we do. This can't just be a work group that's happening in a particular bureau. This has to be something that citywide we're focused on. And so what I've committed to as Portland's next mayor is keeping all of the urban development bureaus in my portfolio, making sure that I'm reassigning civil rights FTE to monitor our compliance with the Fair Housing Act and really focusing on stabilizing communities even as our city is growing. I was part of the coalition that actually brought the residential infill project online. We worked hard to make sure that the deeper affordability bonuses were included in that. Now, in the long term, what we need to focus on is access to home ownership for Black Portlanders. We can work with our partners in the community land trust space to make sure that we're investing there, but there are also some creative things that we can do. And so in my Housing for All plan, which I encourage you to go take a look at sarah2020.com. Anyway, you can find out more there about my housing plan.
Excellent. Mayor Wheeler, would you like to respond?
Yeah, sure. I mean, all of those are good ideas, and all of those are ideas that are already underway or in some cases even completed. We already work with a coalition of Black leaders in the community, the Northeast Housing Coalition, and they've had tremendous results working with the Housing Bureau on housing retrofits, on support for renters, on support for property owners, and that's the kind of work we're going to continue to do. We have predicated development in this city under my administration on anti-displacement. That includes the most recent transportation bond and the work that's going to be done through the Southwest Housing Corridor, or the Southwest Corridor. I put the gauntlet down early and I said, we are not going to contribute to the transportation needs until we have the anti-displacement strategy funded first, and we have agreed to that. And moreover, we continue to work with the community around economic development, around household support. During the COVID crisis, we allocated $35 million towards rent support. So we're already doing the things that have been suggested.
Excellent. Sarah, would you like a minute to respond?
Yes, thank you. Really, we have to pause and think about where we were 4 years ago. 2016, the incumbent mayor was making a lot of promises to our community about ending homelessness. Meanwhile, we have failed to make good on that promise. We've seen claims of success with regard to the housing bond, but when you really look at those numbers, you'll see that only a few dozen of the units that they claim as being successful are even habitable. Most of them are in so-called pre-development. So when I take the number 9 bus up Powell Boulevard and I see an empty lot with a chain link fence that's been like that for 3 years and counting, you have to really interrogate whether or not progress on however the mayor's keeping tabs is reflected in the everyday lives of Portlanders. This accountability is going to be important because what I'm hearing from my neighbors is that things don't feel like they're getting better. There's a lot of fear with regard to whether or not reality and rhetoric will align anytime soon. And this is something, again, we need to have our elected officials held accountable for their performance, not just in the last 6-8 months, but over the last 4 years.
Thank you. We are now going to take a small break to hear about more opportunities from Imagine Black, formerly PAALF.
Dear Black people, we are the movers and the shakers, the culture creators. We are the very foundation of this country. Our voice matters. Our vote matters. But Oregon's data doesn't show the strength of our Black voter power. That's why we launched our Black Possibility Survey. We know that together, we can be louder. When you take this survey, you can tell us what's most important to you during this election season. We can keep you informed on the issues that directly affect the Black community. We can hold our elected officials accountable. And we can stay connected, keeping our community and our vote strong. The survey only takes about 5 minutes to fill out, and you can take it from your phone right now. Let's lift every voice. Go to imagineblack.org/Black Possibilities Survey. A new world is waiting. Dear Black Portland, Imagine Black emerges from your imagination, your dreams, and your fierce advocacy. We know we are more powerful together, so we invite you to join our crew. What does our crew do? We move together on the demands and actions that we all identify as most meaningful. By tapping into our collective power, we can identify and create the spaces that we need to come together, organize together, and thrive together. So find your kin, find your folks, and join a movement that is grounded in empowering the voices of our diverse Portland Black community. Become a Kinfolk member right now by going to imagineblack.org/membership. That's imagineblack.org/membership. A new world is waiting.
We are back. If you're just tuning in, I am Shani Harris-Bagwell, here with Mayor Ted Wheeler and mayoral candidate Sarah Iannarone at the mayoral debate for Black Portland. Portland is a tale of two cities. We are seen globally as a leader in green economy, but there's been an historic lack of green investment within the Black community. Because racism persists in institutional practices and policies, Black people are disempowered, disenfranchised, and disinherited from the benefits of healthy environments and climate change programs and policies in the city of Portland. How will you ensure Portland's Black community is deeply informed, engaged, and benefiting from our local climate action plan commitments without offloading that work onto Black-led organizations. We will begin with Sarah Iannarone. You have 2 minutes. It starts now.
Thank you so much for this important question. It's actually one of the things that brings me to run for mayor. My job for the last 10 years was hosting visiting leaders from around the world who came to Portland to study that very thing, our green leadership. And what became clear to me after years of that storytelling with them was that there was a very big disconnect between the Portland brand, our role in the global marketplace, and the everyday lives of Portlanders, especially Black Portlanders. And so thinking through that, especially inspired by the People's Plan forwarded by PAALF, is how can we make sure that our resources in the city are deployed not only for the benefit of Black Portlanders, but deployed at the discretion of Black Portlanders. So there are things like participatory budgeting, which I think will be important to implement with urgency. I've called for community-led planning processes. So in my housing plan, there's a concept, Minneapolis is leading on this in terms of how can we make sure that communities have the resources that they need to make the investments that they want. Community member organizations like Apano or Living Cully, for instance, are working in their neighborhoods to make critical investments. And how can we make sure that our city resources in the Planning Bureau, in the Development Bureau, in Prosper Portland, and the Housing Bureau are actually undergirding these processes and not making them more challenging. We can also look at how we can invest in community land trusts, access to ownership and control over the land, which ultimately is of the highest order when it comes to who has say over what works, so ownership is very important there. All of these things together will lead toward a city that has better outcomes, because we know that when things are led by the people most affected, then the solutions are actually the most appropriate for whatever challenge we're trying to face.
How will you ensure that the Black community is informed, engaged, and benefiting from our local climate action plan with commitments without offloading that work onto Black-led organizations? You have 2 minutes beginning now.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and it's an important one. And I agree with Challenger Iannarone when she says that Portland's lost some of its luster on its leadership around climate action, but I believe my administration has regained that momentum. For example, with our commitment to go to 100% renewable energy, the Black community and other communities of color were included in the structure of that plan, which includes direct community investment. The second thing was around our emergency climate declaration that we did just recently. I was prepared to bring that earlier, but people had from the community said, let's slow this down, let's be more specific about what our goals are going to be, and let's make sure that Black, Indigenous, and people of color are prioritized in that climate action plan. And we have a really impressive opportunity coming up here around marrying the Portland Clean Energy Fund, which was supported by the taxpayers, the voters, a year ago. I certainly will admit front and center I had some problems with the mechanism, but the values behind it, the strategies behind it are sound, and I've partnered with Commissioner Hardesty to not only make that an effective source of funding directly for communities of color, but it's an opportunity to invest in job training and education for the emerging green opportunities in our community, whether that's energy retrofits, whether that's solar installation, whether that's other opportunities around green infrastructure, architecture, construction. All of these are really good opportunities to marry economic prosperity opportunities with our climate action goals. And so I'm really excited to continue to work with my partner on this, Commissioner Hardesty, the rest of the City Council, Prosper Portland, and that broad community coalition that's out there supporting this work.
Thank you. Sarah Iannarone, would you like 1 minute to respond?
Yes, thank you. For the record, Commissioner Hardesty has unendorsed Mayor Wheeler's re-election bid, and so I think that's important when it comes to who we're saying is going to be our partner in the future. Furthermore, we have to look at the reality of who Portlanders and Black Portlanders in particular are going to trust on this issue. When communities of color led on the Portland Clean Energy Fund, the incumbent aligned with the Downtown Business Association against that, rather than, as I did, coming out in the streets and showing up on rainy Saturday mornings to canvass for that and make sure that voters were passing that. And we understood that this was going to be an important start to a better future. And it's that willingness to work with community and trust the community that differentiates me from him, because he sided with the PBA against PSEF initially, and only now is he circling back once it's a proven success and saying, oh, I'm here and I'm championing it. But we need a mayor who's going to champion community-led solutions from day one and trust that the community is leading us in the right direction on those things.
Mayor Wheeler, would you like a minute to respond?
Yeah, thank you for that. Again, I met with the coalition very early, and I made it very clear that I supported the goals, that I supported the values. But as the former treasurer for the state of Oregon and somebody with a deep finance background, I had real concerns about the specific taxing mechanism. And those concerns were realized when it turned out that everything from people's pensions, automobile sales, tool sales, other things that people didn't think were included got swept up in that mechanism. But I immediately committed to the coalition and to Commissioner Hardesty that I would double down and make sure this thing was implemented as well it could possibly be and make it a national model. And I'm really proud of the negotiations Commissioner Hardesty and I did together to bring the Portland Business Alliance and the Community Coalition together on a compromise package that now allows this thing to take off. And it's potentially $50 million a year towards job training, education, tooling up, connecting people with economic opportunity.
Thank you.
And all of us should be proud of that.
Thank you. We will be back after a short break.
Here at Imagine Black, we bring the margins to the center, and a Black queer feminist lens helps us do that. The Black queer feminist lens is a political theory and practice developed out of the Black feminist and LGBTQ+ movements for liberation. It clarifies that we will only see Black liberation by centering the experiences and leadership of Black queer, trans, gender non-conforming, non-binary, intersex, femme, poor, disabled, immigrant and refugee, working and undocumented people, period. Simply put, the Black queer feminist lens means we have to take Fannie Lou Hamer's words seriously. Nobody is free until everybody is free. Learn more about the Black queer feminist lens and how it impacts all aspects of our work here at imagineblack.org. Here at Imagine Black, we believe that what you do to the land, you do to the people. We recognize Indigenous peoples as the traditional stewards of this land. Indigenous and Black people have deep ancestral knowledge of the land, a tether to maintain and preserve access to air and water, and also our relationships to plant and animal life. We are moving towards environmental and climate justice with our Afro-ecology framework. Afro-ecology helps us build a colorful world with Black joy, where Black communities are well connected, safe from toxins, and thriving. Like you, we know that whether we're advocating for safer streets, housing access, transit equity, reproductive rights, or climate justice, it all comes back to the root, Black life. Become a part of our movement and subscribe to our newsletter by going to imagineblack.org/ECJ.
If you're just tuning in, I'm Shani Harris-Bagwell, here with Mayor Ted Wheeler and mayoral candidate Sarah Iannarone at the mayoral debate for Black Portland. I would like to take this moment to lift up the names of Black people killed by Portland police officers. Please note this list is not exhaustive. This next segment is dedicated to Aaron M. Campbell, Andre C. Gladden, Christopher Kalanji, Deontay Keller, James Jahar Akbar Perez, Jason Washington, Keaton Otis, Kendra James, Lloyd Tony Stevenson, Patrick Kimmins, Quanice Hayes, and Terrell Kyreem Johnson. In the wake of the Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Tony McDade murders, Black Portlanders, together with thousands of allies, have led uprisings all across our city. The Portland Police Bureau responded with escalated violence against our city's grieving Black community. Portland is in desperate need of brave leadership that is willing to be in active solidarity with the Black community. After more than 100 days of protests for Black liberation and racial justice, people on the streets have made clear demands for reimagining public safety. What are your plans to decrease police funding while reinvesting in the Black community that has been deeply impacted by police violence? We will begin with Sarah Iannarone.
Thank you for reading those names and for taking time in this event to address this important issue. My campaign last November released a plan that at the time was quite groundbreaking because there weren't tens of thousands of people demonstrating in the streets. And what it was called was Rethinking Public Safety. And what was in that plan was what we had been hearing from BIPOC Portlanders, immigrant and refugee communities, LGBTQ communities, and other marginalized groups for years, which is we need to divest from militarized police spending and reinvest in community-led solutions. It was relatively groundbreaking, and it took a lot of courage for us to put that out because, as I say, there weren't thousands of people demonstrating in the streets. But since then, what I have done is stood alongside the Black Lives Matter movement in Portland. I stood alongside them in the last round of budget hearings in support of the $50 million cuts that they requested, understanding the years of community input, research, and advocacy that went into establishing that number. I have continued to work with leaders of the movement, especially young leaders of the movement, to make sure that we are focused on what is most important, which is putting an end to the police violence that we know is disproportionately affecting Black Portlanders.
I just want to pause and just redirect a little bit. What is your plan for reinvesting police funds into the Black community?
So there are a few things specifically that I would like to speak to. One is our gun violence reduction plan, which looks at upstream public health impacts and decouples our interventions in gun violence from a heavily policing response. And so that is something that my team has published. We work closely with many people from across Portland on that. And what those are community stabilization, family stabilization, renter stabilization, interventions, along with some of the street level interventions that we're more heavily relying on today. Others would be increased investments in Portland's street response and trauma-informed and culturally informed non-armed responses to people in crisis.
That is your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Wheeler, I will restate it one more time. What is your plan for decreasing police funding and reinvesting those funds into the Black community?
So my colleagues and I in the City Council, in addition to about $15 million in cuts that were taken just as a result of declining city revenues, took an additional $15 million in cuts. The reinvestments, which I strongly support, go towards an expansion of the Portland Street Response. This is a non-police intervention for people in crisis on our streets. We've supported a youth leadership forum. We have supported community-based budgeting. We have supported efforts around housing supports. We continue to support efforts that are upstream. Sarah and I are in agreement. If you want to reduce criminal activity and you want to improve community safety, it's about increasing educational opportunities, housing stability, family stability, economic prosperity opportunities, and doing everything you can to create alternatives to incarceration. And it's not well known, but I was actually the first jurisdictional leader in the state as the county chair years ago to advocate for and actually implement Ban the Box as an alternative to incarceration and recidivism, help people gain access to employment. That's the kind of upstream thinking that's required.
Thank you. Sarah, would you like a minute to respond?
The mayor often talks like this hasn't been his task for the 4 years he's been in office prior to this moment. I mean, we really have 3 3/4. We have to look carefully at the reason that I had to put together a Rethinking Public Safety plan this November to begin with, is because he has not made the progress that he's promised. And we are now looking at our 125th odd night of protests in our streets because of the lack of progress on his watch. So when he says we are going to do, I keep asking, why do we find ourselves this far down the road in his administration with more promises about the future, when if he were truly committed to these things, we would have made the requisite progress such that we wouldn't be seeing the protests that we're having today. We're seeing a police force that's out of compliance with our DOJ settlement, again, because of excessive use of police force, a failure to even say the names of Portlanders wrongly killed by Portland police. I mean, very basic revenue neutral things.
That is your time. Thank you. Mayor Wheeler, would you like a minute to respond?
Yeah, this isn't will in the future. These are things that we've either already done or things we're going to continue to do. Look, I heard from day one when I was elected that people wanted more people in leadership, particularly around public safety. And I brought in Danielle Outlaw as the city's first African-American woman police chief. I said that my administration would be the most diverse in history. And I asked Maurice Henderson to join me as my chief of staff. He was the first black man in the history of this city to serve as the chief of staff to a sitting mayor. My staff today, 3/4 of my staff are people who identify as people of color. 5 people specifically identify as black, which is the largest subgroup. And then when it comes to policing, we have supported to the ballot in November an overhaul of the oversight and accountability mechanism. I support it. I'm asking you to support it. We have engaged all members of my city council around improving our collective bargaining agreement so there's more community engagement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have a community question from small business owner Stephen Green.
To our next mayor. My name's Stephen Green, and my question is this.
Green.
Long before George Floyd's death or the civil unrest we see in our city, or even before COVID was a thing, black businesses in Portland were struggling. What are you going to do in the next 4 years to build resiliency in these businesses and have them see a brighter day?
We will begin with Sarah Iannarone.
Thank you for that important question, Stephen. This is critical because we know that economic resilience comes through ownership. And one of the things, as I mentioned earlier in this program, that I'm committed to doing is establishing an officer for small business and entrepreneurship right in the mayor's office. It's been quite some time since we've had someone coordinating these efforts across all the city bureaus, across all of our partnerships in the city and around the region, both in the philanthropic, for-profit and nonprofit sectors, to make sure that we're coordinating all of our resources, our assistance, our capital investments, our technical assistance, our face-to-face commitment. It's very difficult for any small business owner, let alone a black business founder or entrepreneur, to get the help that they need in this city right now. So I'm taking it very down to basics, nuts and bolts of having that person in my office who's going to coordinate those efforts. But it will also be their job to track those investments and make sure that we're truly having the outcomes that we are committing to every time we make a pledge or a challenge or whatever fancy program that often gets wrapped around some of these investments. Finally, I think it's going to be important for us to increase constituent services. So I've called even for a small business storefront. This is where our other community partners from across the economic spectrum, if you will, who have access to resources in terms of small business assistance, technical assistance, education, and even staffing help, to make sure that we're meeting people right where they're at in the investments that they need to make so that they can have prosperous outcome in terms of their investment in our city.
Thank you. Mayor Wheeler, your 2 minutes begins now.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. It's a great question. And as a former small business owner and operator, I know it's tough for any small business owner or entrepreneur to be able to get through this particular crisis. And we know factually it's doubly hard for business owners and operators who are from communities of color, including the black community, just in terms of access to capital resources, technical assistance, training, even affiliate groups who can help lift people up. It's harder to come by. And my administration, since day one, has focused on this issue. We created with Prosper Portland the Inclusive Business Resource Network, which focuses on support, technical assistance, access to capital for small business owners and operators of color. We created the Portland Means Progress Initiative. We have focused on elevating the Mercatus and the My People's Market, which give minority business owners and operators direct access to markets and suppliers and other network supports, which are critically important. And then when it comes even to COVID recovery, the first $2 million that went out the door to small businesses, 90% went to businesses owned and operated by people of color, not accidentally, but intentionally, because we elevated equity and diversity in our emergency response.
Do you know which percentage went to Black-owned businesses?
I'm sorry that I don't, Shani, know specifically, but it was a large portion of that 90%. I can get back to you. I'm sorry, I don't know off the top of my head, and I should. Thank you.
Sorry, I interrupted your response. Would you like to finish your time?
No, that was good. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Sarah, would you like a minute to respond?
This is where we need to be very clear about having a people's mayor. We're having an incumbent talk about having owned and operated a small business. He has a trust fund. When he opens a business, it's not the same as it is for working Portlanders who don't have, a fund to fall back on when things get hard. We have to know that the city is going to be there with the assistance that our partner organizations are willing to administer, but also with the resources so that people know how to have access to help. We've seen how little of the PPP money went to Black businesses. We've seen how little assistance is actually there prior to COVID and will probably be there on the other side of COVID when it comes to making investments in businesses led by Black Portlanders and Portlanders of color. And so it really is about that lived experience, but also the willingness to track the data. The tech pledge inside Portland Means Progress has had a net loss of Black workers in it. We have to be held accountable when things aren't meeting up to what we promised.
Thank you. Mayor Wheeler, would you like a minute to respond?
Yeah, I'm not going to take the bait, but I will respond. First of all, as the state treasurer, I created the Oregon Investment Board, and one of the very first investments that board made, and I was the chair at the time, was investing in funds that specifically supported minority business owners here in the state of Oregon, as well as specifically in the city of Portland. And then the second thing I would point out is that from day one, we have elevated equity and diversity in those responses. Sarah is right that I did inherit money. That is true. But in order to get it, my father had to die. And if I could make that choice, I would easily say I didn't need the money. At the time I started my business, the way I did it was bootstrapped it. I had a credit card. I borrowed from friends and family. It wasn't until much later in my life that I inherited money. But anybody who knows me knows it's not about the money for me. It's never been about the money.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. This next section, oops, my teleprompter was going the wrong way. All right. This next section is going to be our rapid fire section. We will be asking yes or no questions. Please answer only with yes or no. If that isn't possible, you may pass. Again, the section is yes, no, or pass answers only. Question 1. Will you pledge not to take contributions from the police, prison, and incarceration industry, not to seek their endorsement, and to publicly reject their independent expenditures? Yes or no, Mayor Wheeler?
Yes.
Sarah Iannarone?
Yes.
Thank you. Next question. Will you support legislation banning the use of non-lethal force, chemical, and kinetic weapons by law enforcement agencies? Yes or no? Sarah Iannarone?
Yes.
Mayor Wheeler?
Yes, and it needs to happen at the state level.
Excellent, thank you. Next question. Will you commit to never voting for police budget increases again? Yes or no? Mayor Wheeler?
No.
Sarah Iannarone?
Pass.
Next question. After the murder of Breonna Taylor, Louisville, Kentucky City Council voted unanimously to ban no-knock warrants. Will you introduce policy to end no-knock warrants in Portland, yes or no? Sarah Iannarone.
Yes.
Mayor Wheeler.
I'm going to pass because I need to know more about the consequences.
Thank you. We are going to take a small break to hear about some more opportunities from Imagine Black before closing remarks.
Imagine Black is an abolitionist organization. Our work is for the love of all Black people. Our radical imagination of a city that loves Black people requires abolition. We imagine a future without police. And together with our kinfolk, we want to create transformative alternatives. It is beyond time to move towards community safety that supports a healthy, healed Black community. Our demands are simple: defund local police, reinvest in Black futures, protect our communities from violence. Our position is clear. We are in defense of all Black lives. A new world is waiting. Join the movement. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay in the know on our abolition campaign. At Imagine Black, we envision living in a city that loves Black people. We imagine a world where every Black person has the rights, resources, and recognition to be a thriving, resilient, and connected community. We are freedom dreamers. 2020 has made one thing clear. Now is the time to invest in Black liberation and self-determination. Your support is critical to this work. A donation to Imagine Black helps us maintain our capacity to affect change in the Black community. We all have a role to play in the movement for Black liberation. Go to imagineblack.org/donate. Give generously. Let's turn dreams into reality.
Thank you, candidates, for your participation today. You will each have 2 minutes for closing remarks. We will begin with Mayor Wheeler.
Well, first of all, thank you for sponsoring this important forum. Thank you to Open Signal, and thank you to Sarah. I think this has been a good conversation about very important issues, and I'm glad that our only in-person forum elevates the Black community. It's important that we do so intentionally, particularly at this time. You know me. I am somebody who's served this community for 12 years. I see it as much as a calling as a job, and I'm always proud to serve the community, and I look forward to having the opportunity to continue. We have a choice as a community in terms of who leads us through the COVID crisis, the economic downturn, the national calls for racial justice and equity and police reform, how we're going to address some of the violence we've seen on the streets, and yes, how we address vulnerable populations, particularly the homeless populations on our street, to as quickly and humanely get as many people off the streets as possible. I'm proud of the work that my administration has done, the work we've done collectively with all members of the Portland City Council and important coalitions in the community around housing, around shared economic prosperity, around addressing the homeless situation, around supporting our small business owners and operators in the Black community. I look forward to serving, and those who look at these races closely have already made a decision. I'm proud of the endorsements of the Scanner, the Oregonian, Willamette Week, the Portland Tribune, and leaders like State Senator Lou Frederick, House Representative Janelle Bynum, and former State Senator Margaret Carter and Abel Gordley, and many, many others. And I'm asking you to join our team as well. I thank you for your consideration of your support on November 3rd. My name is Ted Wheeler at tedwheeler.com, and I thank you for tuning in tonight.
Thank you. Sarah Iannarone, you have 2 minutes to close.
Thank you, Shani. You did a fantastic job tonight, and thank you for the crew, Open Signal and PAALF, for hosting us. This is a critical election. Nationally, yes, but also locally. When you look not just at the events of this summer, in which we saw night after night of Portland police under this mayor's watch brutalizing Black Lives Matter demonstrators. Millions of dollars in police overtime. Just in June alone, $4 million in police overtime. When I think about the guaranteed basic income program that I'm proposing, the price tag to get $1,000 to 125 Black mothers is $1.8 million. So just think about what we are not investing in when we are investing in policing the way that Mayor Wheeler has been investing. And then ask yourself, how is Portland feeling to you? He ran 4 years ago, making a lot of promises to Portlanders, and I would ask you to think in this moment, does it feel like Portland's getting better on his watch? Or do we need someone who understands Portland differently? We need someone who gets the fact that working Portlanders are struggling right now. We need a leader who's invested in green jobs creation and making sure that we're rethinking public safety from top to bottom, rethinking how we provide housing for everyone so that our revenue is smart and progressive and that we're protecting the most vulnerable people, making sure we're tapping into every community resource available to shore up our most vulnerable, especially the unhoused Portlanders who we know have been on the receiving end of everyone's violence, including police violence. And so as we move forward, we need a leader who is courageous, who is steadfast, who will not roll out the red carpet for white nationalists who are seeking to come here and inflict harm on vulnerable Portlanders. You need a mayor like me. My name is Sarah Iannarone. I'm asking for your vote this November. You can find out more about me at sarah2020.com. Thank you and good night.
Thank you so much for attending Imagine Black, formerly PAALF Action Fund's first ever mayoral debate for Black Portland. Thank you to Open Signal. Thank you to Black Voices United for your participation, and thank you, candidates. I'm Shani Harris-Bagwell, and it's been a pleasure being your moderator. Thank you all for watching. Stay Black, Portland.